Michael?
Call him, don't text.
We should make sure everybody's muted also.
Hey, Mike, it's Trisha. We lost your sound. Yeah, we can't hear you on the live stream or on the Zoom.
Go ahead.
Great. Good morning. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Board of Regents. This meeting was noticed in accordance with the open meeting laws and Regents bylaws regarding special meetings, and in accordance with the governor's executive order, which allows board members and presenters to participate remotely via video conferencing. The secretary will call the roll.
Thank you. Regents Anguiano.
Here.
Blum. Butler.
Here.
Cohen. Elliott. Estelano.
Here.
Goober. Kiefer. Kounalakis.
Here.
Lansing.
Here.
Lieb.
Here.
Makarishian.
Here.
Napolitano.
Here.
Newsome. Ortiz Oakley.
Here.
Park.
Here.
Perez.
Here.
Riley.
Here.
Rendon. Sherman.
Here.
Simmons. Suarez.
Here.
Thurman.
Here.
Weddle.
Here.
Zettel. You have a quorum for a special meeting.
Thank you. I'd now like to take the next 30 minutes for public comment. To our guests today, welcome and thank you for your interest in the University of California and for taking time to join us. The Regents appreciate your observations and comments. As the notice on the Regents website indicated, because of health and safety considerations with regard to public meetings currently confronting all state agencies, public comment will be by telephone. The secretary will be calling individuals when it's their turn to speak. Please be patient as we do our best to hear from as many of you by telephone. The secretary will now review the procedures and ground rules and then recognize each speaker in turn. Again, thanks to the speakers for their comments at this special meeting of the Board of Regents. Madam Secretary.
Thank you. So this morning we have quite a number of individuals signed up to speak. We'll do our best to hear from as many as we can in the 30 minutes. We ask that each speaker hold their comments to no more than 1 minute. What we're going to do is I'm going to call 5 names at a time, and then we will be dialing their phone numbers. I won't give speakers a warning, but when the minute's up, my little beeper will go off. If you don't finish your comments or you have written comments you'd like to share with the Regents, please feel free to send them to our Regents office email address, which is on our website. So our first 5 speakers this morning are Varsha Sarveshwar, Casey Keys, Maureen Simmons, Jenna Gard, and Aiden Arasassingham. So as soon as we have Varsha or one of the other 4, please proceed.
Varsha, please go ahead with your comment.
Good morning. This is Varsha Sarveshwar, President of the UC Student Association.
I hear somebody, but it's not loud enough to be heard. If we can adjust the sound, please, and have them start over without counting it against their time.
Right, I haven't started the clock yet.
Varsha, please try again.
Good morning. This is Varsha Sarveshwar, President of the UC Student Association, strongly encouraging you to unanimously endorse ACA 5. One of the most serious issues facing our student body is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or more accurately, Black growth. Black, Latinx, Native, and historically marginalized Asian Pacific Islander communities are dramatically underrepresented at the UC. Students and communities who do make it onto our campuses in a learning environment feel others would like to more share their experiences. The psychological impacts of this are profound and damaging, translating into lower retention and graduation rates. While efforts like outreach, recruitment, retention,
The call dropped. Casey
Okay.
Keys, are you on the line?
Okay, and if you want to dial Varsha back, we'll try her again in a bit. Go
Sounds
ahead,
good.
Casey.
Yes, hi. Honorable Regents, thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Casey Keys. Please also see the letter that was submitted to you from New Directions in Diversity via email. In 1997, myself and 7 other law students at UC Berkeley and 1 PhD student at Harvard formed an independent study class in the aftermath of the passage of Prop 209. This law and policy had an immediate and devastating impact on equity and diversity in higher education. UC Berkeley Law School went from being the most racially diverse law school in the country in 1995 to having 1 incoming African American student in the first-year class of 1997. The negative impact to diversity at the UCs continues to this day. 23 years after our report and the devastation wreaked by Prop 209, we urge the Regents to support ACA 5 and return the UC system to one that is accessible to all members of our diverse state. Thank you so much.
Maureen, please proceed.
Good morning, Regents. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I represent one of the 1.9% of Black students at UC Berkeley. U.S. News ranks UC Berkeley as the #1 public university, but an article published by the San Francisco Gate ranks it the worst university for Black students with an equity index rating of 2.4 on a scale of 0 to 4. These findings prompted Black students to meet with Chancellor Christ seeking redress. Instead, we were told Prop 209 prohibited any rectification. In response, we facilitated a campus climate hearing with the Assembly Select Committee on Campus Climate, chaired by Assembly Member Dr. Shirley Weber. At that hearing, myself and 2 other Black Cal students called for the repeal of Prop 209. Afterwards, I found Black Berkeley Law alum Eva Patterson, who founded the Opportunity for All Coalition to assist with repeal efforts. History will say it was Black students at Cal that initiated this repeal. What will history say about you? Thank you.
Varsha, can you please repeat your comment? We didn't catch it.
Hi, yes, good morning, everyone. I was saying that the psychological impacts of our struggles with diversity are profoundly damaging on our students, translating into lower retention and graduation rates. While efforts like outreach, recruitment and retention, holistic admissions, and cluster hiring are valuable, they can't do what affirmative action does. It is clear to me that our struggles with diversity, equity, and inclusion and our campus climate crisis cannot be solved without repealing Proposition 209. For that reason, the UC Student Association calls upon you to unanimously endorse ACA 5. Thank you.
Jenna, please proceed.
Hi, I'm Jenna Gardy from the Praxis Project in Oakland, California. Passing ACA 5 and restoring affirmative action in public contracting, hiring, and education will give our leaders the tools that they need to really achieve racial equity in California. We strongly support ACA 5, and we urge you to consider supporting ACA 5 as well. Thank you.
Okay, I think maybe we have Aiden speaking, but before I want to call the next 5 so they can get ready. Kirby Lynch, Suad Noir, Vincent Rasso, Zainab Al-Taras, and Jose Venegas.
Aiden, please proceed.
Good morning, members of the Board of Regents. My name is Aiden Arasaw-Singham, and I'm the newly elected undergraduate external vice president at UCLA. I'm here to speak in support of your strong endorsement of ACA 5, opening the doors to the reinstitution of affirmative action at UC. UCLA students have been in favor for this for decades, and I'd actually like to read from what UCLA student body president Dean Flores said on affirmative action in 1986. Quote, "What does merit mean? Merit is the outcome of hard work. An A student might have done well on the SAT, may or may not have worked hard at doing well on them, may be good at the kinds of tasks the SAT tests create. A C student may have worked long hours in order to support the parental family, have a language barrier, or not be accustomed to mainstream American cultural values. Who has merited or worked the hardest? Merit is a story told to each other by the beneficiaries of past definitions of merit, who pretend that these definitions are precise measures of who gets what in the society." End quote. What was said in 1986 still holds true today in 2020. Students have fought for this for decades. Many of you on this board have fought for this for decades. So be driven by the weight of history in this important vote and endorse ACA 5 today. Thank you.
We are contacting more speakers. Stand by.
Okay, while they're doing that, I'll call the next five. Ivan Evans, Brian Goldfarb, Lily Arani, Ilana Zilberg, and Oscar Macias.
Kirby, please proceed.
Kirby Lynch. My name is Kirby Lynch, and I'm a current PhD candidate at UC Berkeley. I have been a part of the UC system since 2013 when I entered as a college freshman. I am here as a proponent of ACA 5 because it is time that the UC reimagine its future as an institution of public good. The passage of Prop 209 has done damage to a generation in California and has prevented them from access to the premier institutions making innovative changes in the 21st century. Since my time at Berkeley in 2013, Black enrollment has decreased. A UC study in 2018 claimed UC Berkeley to be one of the worst universities for Black students. In my graduate school experience currently, out of 3,000 PhD students, less than 200 are Black. Marginalized students are virtually excluded from gaining admissions into the university because of implicit bias and status quo. Marginalized students are being blocked from becoming a high-wage earner in the state of California because there is no investment in equity in our education system. The change is needed now, or the wealth gap will continue in this state. The UC is for public good and not for the privileged few. Thank you.
Suad, please proceed.
Good morning. My name is Suad, and I am an associate for EAVP's Racial Justice Now and a student advisory board member for the equity-based nonprofit Board of Alliance for Equity. As a low-income first-generation Somali-American student activist at Berkeley majoring in business administration and legal studies, there are plenty of systemic obstacles in the way of me succeeding in life. Too many to count, and due to my many marginalized identities, I know I will continue to face obstacles. It is important that we consider race and gender to level the playing field and promote equal opportunity, especially when tackling the underutilization of minorities in the work field. Restoring affirmative action will ensure that those who most need resources will get them in terms of public contracting, education, and hiring. At a time like this, it is important that we make sure to invest in our marginalized communities. I urge you all to endorse ACA 5. Thank you for your time.
Vincent, please proceed with your comment.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good morning, Chair Perez and members of the board. My name is Vincent Rosso, and I'm a student and the incoming external vice president at UC Riverside, and I'm also a representative of the UC Student Association. I'm here today to urge you all to vote in favor of endorsing the Assembly Constitutional Amendment ACA 5. This piece of legislation will repeal Proposition 209, a policy that largely devastated the diversity and equity, not only across higher education, but in public hiring practices, and so much more beyond our ability to measure. The impact of COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted Black communities, women, and other people of color through health, education, jobs, and so much more. I urge the Regents to recognize their role in combating anti-Blackness while working to uplift marginalized communities. The UC chancellors, students across the UC, and leaders and students across the CSU and California community college systems all support, and we look forward to your support as well. Thank you.
Zainab, please proceed.
Hello. Hi, I'm here today to ask you to endorse ACA 5, which repeals Prop 209. ACA 5 will create fair opportunities and prevent discrimination against women and people of color by allowing gender, racial, and ethnic diversity to be considered as one of the many factors in public employment, public contracting, and public education in California. Prop 209 ended almost all programs designed to open doors of equal opportunity for women and people of color in California's public sector. When Prop 209 was passed, some thought taking a colorblind approach would end discrimination in the public sector. However, 24 years later, that statistics have proven otherwise. What they fail to consider is taking a colorblind approach also makes you blind to the structural discrimination and disparities of people of color. For example, Prop 209 directly led to the 12 to 60% reduction in admission and enrollment of students of color at the University of California, depending on location. I urge you to be on the right side of history and endorse ACA 5. Thank you.
Ivan Evans, please proceed.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Evans. I'm a professor of sociology and provost of Eleanor Roosevelt College at UC San Diego, and I'm calling you to urge you to support ACA 5 and to overturn Proposition 209. I think we have an historic opportunity to reset the tone of race and ethnic relations at the UCs, and I urge you to do so. I have been a professor for 30 years now at UC San Diego, and I have watched the virtual expulsion of African Americans in particular from the university. I have watched Proposition 209 contribute to the worsening of ethnic and race relations on campus. Many domestic minorities feel that the university is capable of and actually willing to spend money on incoming international students, but argues that its hands are bound by Proposition 209 and cannot do so. There are numerous other negative consequences that Proposition 209 has had on the UCs, and I support all the others who have called in to speak in favor of repealing the measure. I thank you for your support and your willingness to consider it. I think, as I said, that we have an historic opportunity to right the wrongs in California. Thank you.
Jose, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Jose Venegas. I work with Blue Educational Foundation in Riverside School District, and I'm a college prep advisor. I think it's very important that we pass this kind of action. I myself grew up here in the IE, and I didn't actually get to go to a college straight out of high school. I didn't do that until I went to community college, and then I graduated from UC Riverside, and I felt that if I had more opportunity, I could have gone straight to a UC and done it myself. It's not that I didn't lack like education or the skills necessary. It's in that I didn't have the same opportunities that other kids had. So I think it's very important that kids like me, growing up in high school, we're capable of doing it. We just need that extra help, those extra resources and guidance to be able to go to a UC system or higher education. And I would like to thank everybody who supports this measure, and thank you.
Madam Secretary, if you don't mind calling more names, please.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the ones I'd already called, and then I'll call 5 more. Brian Goldfarb, Lily Irani, Ilana Zilberg, Oscar Macias, 5 new names: Arden Levy, Sadia Farheen Khan, Regina Borzunia, Carolina Villegas, and Miranda Mosley.
Lily, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, I wanted to thank everybody for their comments so far. I think they've made a lot of important points that I agree with. My name is Lily Irani, and I'm an associate professor at UC San Diego. And as a researcher and teacher, I'm calling to urge you to support ACA 5 and the overturn of Prop 209. I wanted to focus my comments on what the overturn would mean for taking seriously the University of California as an institution charged with producing and amplifying knowledge for all Californians. My research group has undergraduates who do work on the futures of work, culture, and technology. The work in my research group is better when I have students who come from families of taxi drivers, of nurses, and of construction workers. But I find that with tuition increases of the UC, the difficulties of affordable housing, and because of the impossibility of exercising affirmative action in admissions, it's difficult to find the diversity of cultural and life experiences that would help us identify the gaps in knowledge around the future work that we need to actually make knowledge as useful for all Californians. Doing well on tests could not be more different than creating insights about what's missing from our collective knowledge. And so I ask you to support the overturn of 209 and also support actual investment in equity through allocating substantive resources like lower tuition and housing support for students so that they have the time to be on campus. They have the time to have unstructured conversations that are difficult to have online. They have the time to come together to build trust so that we can do the research and create new knowledge for all Californians together. Thank you.
Ilana, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Ilana Zolberg. I am an associate professor in the communication department at UC San Diego, and I am urging you to endorse the Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5 and with it the repeal of the disastrous Proposition 209. I'll try to make my comments brief, but they come from a rather oblique angle, but I think relevant. I was born and raised in the former British colony Rhodesia, which seceded from Britain in order to maintain its white supremacist foundations. Naive to be sure, I grew up looking to the United States of America as a model for a racially integrated educational system and society. But when I arrived in the US, my colonial white privilege was embraced and rewarded yet again by the public educational systems through which I graduated, high school, undergraduate, and graduate school, and again as an assistant professor. It was immediately apparent to me that the United States had not only not resolved its racist legacies, but that my arrival in this country coincided with a backlash against all small gains achieved, which were to culminate 16 years after my arrival in the dismantling of affirmative action in higher education system. That impetus for this disastrous rewriting of affirmative action as reverse racism first erupted in the very university where I was enrolled, the University of Texas at Austin, was tragic farce.
Oscar, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning, Regents. My name is Oscar Macias, and I'm an undergraduate student at UCLA. I'm here with the Underscore. As a student group, we've advocated for equitable and diverse admissions policy in the UC system through the elimination of standardized testing. During the last Regents meetings, we were able to take a huge step forward towards this vision by formally eliminating our use of standardized testing and admissions policy. Today, we have yet another opportunity to advance this conversation. As a first-generation Latino student, I've come to witness the impacts that Proposition 209 has had on communities like mine. I grew up in the Imperial Valley, one of the poorest counties in Southern California, and I witnessed how many of my peers were disenfranchised from continuing their pursuit of higher education. That is why I'm here today to urge the Regents to endorse ACA 5 and uphold their support for our more marginalized communities. Thank you.
Arden, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, Honorable Regents. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Arden Dressner-Levy. I'm an undergraduate student at UCLA. And today I would like to read you a quote from the American Civil Liberties Union because they explain the need for affirmative action better than I ever could. They write that affirmative action is one of the most effective tools for addressing the injustices caused by our nation's historic discrimination against people of color and women, and for leveling what continues to be an uneven playing field. A centuries-long legacy of racism and sexism has not been eradicated, and avenues for opportunity for those previously excluded remain far too narrow. We need affirmative action now, more than ever." End quote. I urge you to take the opportunity to use the power that you have as Regents to support equity for people of color and women in California by supporting ACA 5. Thank you so much for your time.
Sadia, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, my name is Sadia Khan. I'm a senior at UC Berkeley, and I urge the Regents to endorse ACA 5. Proposition 209 not only ended race-conscious programs in California, it unnecessarily ended the collection of appropriate data related to race, ethnicity, and gender in most jurisdictions of California. In other words, Prop 209 is the epitome of the phrase, "I do not see color." But as we know, pretending to ignore race does not make racial issues disappear. A report by the UCOP shows that Prop 209 led to a decline of the likelihood of admissions of applicants from underrepresented groups across all UCs, but especially at schools like UC Berkeley and UCLA, we saw a drop of about 25%. Even at Berkeley itself, the Black student population is less than 2%. as a high school student, when I saw myself as one of two hijabi girls in a population that was much larger than it's much smaller compared to Berkeley, but at Berkeley I cannot imagine what it's like to be a Black student, to walk around and be the only student in a class full of hundreds of students. I've had courses full of 700 plus students with only one Black student. I cannot imagine the pain of going through a campus that claims to be diverse and to support Black and brown students when you're the only one sitting there, when every time somebody needs a Black opinion, they look to you to answer for your entire race. That is not fair to any of our students, nor do they give an equitable or inclusive education to those that are Black and brown at UC Berkeley and the rest of the UC campuses. And it is for this reason that I urge the regents to review their own data that they have collected on on the races at UC Berkeley and what that looks like, even at other campuses. That we cannot have equity or inclusion on any of our campuses until we have an increase in Black and brown students, as well as support for Black and brown students. Please support ACA 5. Thank you so much.
Rogina, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, my name is Regina Bazorgia. I'm the incoming external vice president at UC Santa Cruz, and I just wanted to express my support for ACA 5, and I wanted to emphasize how important it is for the UC Regents to endorse it as well, especially due to the fact that the University of California is built mostly on Native land, especially on my campus, but we have such a severe underrepresentation and opportunity gap for Native American students in the UC system, and the significant decrease in Black and Latinx admissions after Prop 209 was passed is extremely concerning, and it is important to have more representation and more students of color on our campus so that we can begin to kind of shorten that extremely wide gap between white and students of color on our campus. So thank you so much.
Carolina, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, good morning. My name is Carolina Villegas, and today I make a public comment urging you, the Board of Regents, to endorse ACA 5. For many people, specifically those who hold an immense amount of privilege allocated to them through their skin color and economic status, this idea of a progressive California exists. However, California has a long history of discrimination, racism, and violence against Black people, Indigenous people, and other minorities. As a governing body that oversees the state's public colleges and universities, it is your job to listen and acknowledge the efforts of Black students, especially those that began ACA 5. We are one of 8 states to ban the consideration of race in university admissions and public employment, leading to the direct impact of minority and women businesses, enterprises becoming less likely to obtain state contracts. Many of you present have degrees in history, business, education. You understand the implications and effects of Proposition 209. You have seen them, indirectly studied them. It would be a disservice if you don't endorse ACA 5. Think about why you are Regents, why you are here today, what your purpose is in your position you hold. Your endorsement is meaningful and should uplift the voices of Indigenous students, minority students, and especially Black students. Thank you.
Before we proceed, I'm going to call 5 more names. Danny Widener, Nicole Nukpezi, Fernanda Romero, Simeon Mann, and Sarah Schneewind.
And then at the end of those 5, we will proceed to the item before us.
Miranda, please proceed with your comment.
Hello. When I think of people who I have to mentor me and coach me, there are very few who can do that on college campuses. Partly because of Prop 209, I'm not able to find people with my experiences in academia. Finding Black professors, Black women professors who have the time and capacity to work with someone who is underrepresented is nearly impossible. Women and Black, Indigenous people of color are thrown to the side in the university, and this harms us otherwise. We have less economic opportunity, especially in the midst of COVID. This means we, women and BIPOC folks, are less likely not only to be professors, but business owners, doctors, engineers, and the like. Repealing Prop 209 tells people like me, my brother, and my cousin, who's like my little sister, that we have that opportunity to create new futures. And repealing Prop 209 gives us that opportunity. Endorse ACA 5. Thank you.
Professor Widener, please proceed.
Dear members of the Board of Regents, I want to thank you for taking your time to give your attention to this important matter. I'm asking you today to support ACA 5. This is an important proposal, which I think will do much if adopted by voters, to make a material statement in favor of racial equality in our society. I'm presently an associate professor of history at UC San Diego. I was the former chair of our Diversity and Equity Committee, and I was a boards rep as well. I'm also a graduate of UC Berkeley, class of 95, so based on that timing, you can tell that I left Cal right before the passage of 209, and I've really seen firsthand the limitations that it places on the university. In my 20 years at UC San Diego, Black faculty, students, and staff have consistently spoken of their isolation. You've heard something about that from other callers. It's not uncommon for a large class of more than 400 students to have only 1 or 2 Black students in it, and this isolation was a key driver of the racist provocation on our campus that we remember as the Compton Cookout. I've also seen our problem is not finding a lack of qualified applicants. We struggle with our yield, right? Top students have a lot of options, and many of ours convinced that better climates can be found elsewhere choose to depart. One of the things that the repeal of 209 would help us with concretely would be financial aid, right? It would allow us to target our fundraising, which could really drive an uptick in yield. I just want to conclude by saying my father began at UCLA in 1955, and at that time, the number of Black students roughly approximated what it is at UC San Diego today. The idea that we haven't made progress in 60 years is absurd, and I ask all of us to get on the right side of history. Thank you.
Nicole, please proceed with your comment.
Hello, Regents. My name is Nicole Nupesa, and I'm a member of Beyond the Score at UCLA. We played a huge role in pushing for the elimination of standardized testing and are here now to continue the fight for accessible and equitable education. As a Black woman from South Central, I see time after time how so many of my peers fall into the cracks and are blocked from going into higher education. Students from low-income communities do not have access to the same resources that guarantee white and African students to going to university, which is why I am urging you, Regents, to support the passing of ACA 5 and guarantee that students like me have a spot in higher education institutions. Repealing Prop 209 ensures that groups of color, too, are seen and heard. By supporting ACA 5 and the UC will lead the way in ensuring higher education is not only accessible and equitable, but guaranteed to folks like us. Thank you.
Fernanda, please proceed with your comment.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fernanda Romero, and I am with Beyond the Score. As a student organization that advocates for equitable admissions, we are glad that the UC Regents are taking the steps towards equitable admissions by eliminating standardized testing by 2025. However, there is much work to be done. That is why I'm here to urge the Regents to endorse ACA 5, which will repeal Prop 209. This is another great step towards equitable admissions and will help the most marginalized students access the education they need to uplift themselves and their communities. As a low-income, undocumented student, my community will benefit. The UC system does not reflect the California demographics, and repealing Prop 209 will allow for more low-income students of color to attain higher education. Thank you.
Simeon, please proceed with your comment.
Hi, my name is Simeon. I'm an associate professor of history at UC San Diego and a board member of the UC San Diego Faculty Association, which represents members of the Senate faculty. I'm calling on behalf of the board to ask the Regents to support placing ACA 5 on the November ballot. Prop 209 has had a negative impact system-wide on the admissions of underrepresented groups. On my own campus at UC San Diego, in which African American students make up only 3% of the student body, we have heard from our own Black and underrepresented students the experiences of feeling alienated, of feeling like they don't belong, and even being treated with suspicion by university police simply by their mere presence. We have a crucial opportunity here to making the UC a truly inclusive and diverse institution, and I urge you to support placing ACA 5 on the ballot. Thank you.
Sarah, please proceed with your comment.
My name is Sarah Schneewind. I'm a full professor in the history department at UCSD, and I'd like to make 2 points very briefly. First, diversity on campus matters for knowledge production, and secondly, diversity on campus matters for academic freedom. As Simeon just mentioned, we have a very low number of students of color on our campus. One result of this is that their academic freedom is impinged upon because they are socially expected to speak for their race rather than representing their own individual opinions in many situations. And this is addressed in the report, Can You See Us?, which came out several years ago. Secondly, one of the main purposes of the university is the pursuit of truth, the production of new knowledge. To see new truths and raise new questions requires new and diverse points of view. Different points of view come, among other things, from different life experiences. For example, in my own field, until there were women historians working on Chinese history, we did not know how many literate women there were writing and affecting Chinese culture in the last 500 years before the dynastic fall. Secondly, until we had female biologists, menstruation and morning sickness were treated as examples of waste and inefficiency in the human body. Female biologists showed that both are functional. So we need diversity on campus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Goldfarb is on the line.
Okay, and just a reminder,
thank
Professor
you.
Goldfarb will be our last speaker. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased and reassured by the unison of public comment that I've heard thus far. I'm chair of the communication department at UCSD. I joined the faculty in 2002. Coming from New York, I recall being surprised and dismayed by the restrictions imposed by 209 and the limitations its implementation had on our efforts to diversify our university and other institutions in California. Our society, its culture, and institutions are anything but colorblind, operating as if we are blind to the inequities that it condones and perpetuates, essentially makes us complicit in obscuring the mechanisms that produce bias and inequity and sustain anti-Blackness. We cannot work on the central, historic, and enduring structural problem of our society without the tools to do so. We need to repeal Prop 209. And we need the Regents to serve as our leaders in promoting policies that allow us as faculty, staff, students, and administrators to confront the lack of proportional diversity in our institutions forcefully and with determination. Thank you.
Thank you. So 30 minutes has passed, then some.
Great. That concludes our public comment. And again, I'd like to thank all of the members, the public, and the university community for sharing their ideas with us this morning. With that, I'd like to proceed to the item before us. Item B1, the endorsement of Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5 and the repeal of Proposition 209 on the November 2020 ballot. President Napolitano, I will first recognize you.
Thank you, Chair Perez. Nearly a quarter of a century ago, California voters approved Prop 209, thereby barring the consideration of race or gender in public university admissions, among other things. It's my honor today to recommend that the board formally support the repeal of Prop 209 and ACA 5, which is the state measure aimed at achieving that repeal. In the years since Prop 209 passed, many of us have watched with dismay and largely tied hands as the number of students from underrepresented groups at UC declined and plateaued. This was despite our continued and creative efforts to attract the best and brightest students from all backgrounds. Without the ability to consider race or gender in our admissions decisions and implement other efforts to diversify our student population, the face of the university became one that does not fully represent the rich diversity of our state. That's detrimental to UC, and it's detrimental to California. Now our state has a chance to take a different path. Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5, introduced by Assemblywoman Shirley Weber, presents an opportunity for California voters to decide Knowing what we know today, whether our public universities should be able to consider race and gender in admissions decisions. The amendment comes at a critical time for our university, our state, and our nation. And I want to thank Assemblywoman Weber for introducing it. Across the country, we are witnessing a growing and long overdue recognition of systemic racism and its harmful effects on people of color and our society as a whole. Here at UC, we're reflecting on our own shortcomings and exploring ways to do and to be better, whether it's by examining potential inequities in standardized testing, scrutinizing our policing practices, or continuing to support programs that help us better understand and address issues of race and inequity. We're going to keep listening, learning, and taking action to ensure that UC is living up to its values of equity and inclusion. But one step the board can take immediately is to make clear UC's position on affirmative action and to put its full support behind ACA 5 and the repeal of Prop 209. I support this measure, and I've spoken publicly about the ways in which Prop 209 has hampered our ability to diversify our student body. In addition, all 10 UC chancellors, the Academic Senate, the UC Student Association, and the UC Graduate and Professional Council have all now publicly expressed their support for ACA 5 and the repeal of Prop 209. Supporting ACA 5 and a repeal of Prop 209 is an important and practical step forward for the university to allow us to consider race and gender as one of the many factors in our admissions decisions. It would serve as a clear statement of our institutional values as the leading public research university in the world. So with that, I'm asking the board for your support of this item to endorse ACA 5 and the repeal of Prop 209. Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Madam President. Regent Lieb, then Regent Oakley, and Estolano.
Thank you very much, Chair Perez. As chair of the Public Engagement Committee, we've seen what has happened with 209 over the past 24 years that it's been enacted. Actually, the regents, unfortunately, have not a great history in this. They were the ones that created Prop 209. We have an opportunity now. We've seen over the years how much our diversity goals have not been met. We have a lot of work to do. Our admissions people would like to be able to use the tools that they can to increase diversity. So therefore, I think it's an incredibly important move for us to make here today. And as chair of the Public Engagement Committee, I would move that the regents go on record in support of ACA 5, which if passed by the voters in November of 2020 would repeal Proposition 209.
I will, Regent Lieb moves, Regent Estolano seconds. Thank you. I will now go to Regent
Thank you, Chair Perez. And mine is a kind of a point of clarification because I thought I understood what it is that we were voting on, but wanted to at least get a bit more clarification on the particular item. And the speakers at public comment perhaps might have got confused on the issue, which leads to my sort of confusion as well too. So bear with me. As I understand it, if we're supporting ACA 5, the point is that we are supporting the idea that the voters should make a decision about whether to repeal Prop 209 or not. And that is a secondary issue or a second step after the Senate approves the measure. So hopefully this isn't I'm not trying to split hairs here in terms of the way it's set up, but I think the messaging is really important because we had multiple speakers who said they want us to support ACA 5, which will repeal Prop 209. And as I read ACA 5, there's obviously a series of whereas statements by the Assembly supporting why 209 had negative consequences and it should be reversed. But the resolution itself is to send it to the voters to vote in the November election to repeal it. So obviously I'm preaching to the choir, and everybody on this call perhaps knows all the details, but it was important for me to sort of understand what it is that we collectively will be endorsing. And I think that messaging is important, because I would strongly support the idea that the Senate also support ACA 5 and let the voters decide, but that doing so does not automatically undo 209. And if we're also supporting the reversal of Prop 209, my concern would be that at least on this special call, that perhaps we may be getting a little bit ahead of the Senate and the legislators, because it's not before the California voters just yet. And I certainly would like this body to be able to vote or at least endorse if and when the actual amendment proposal is on the ballot, that we reconvene and support the direction of it one way or another. But I'm a bit confused and would like at least a bit of a clarification, if for nothing else, than making sure that our messaging to the public is clear.
So I will take that as a question to the chair.
Yes, it is.
Your characterization of ACA 5 is exactly correct. ACA 5 is adopted by the Assembly, and as it is going to be considered by the Senate, solely puts the question of the repeal of Prop 209 before the voters on the November ballot. As such, that question is the repeal of Section 31 of Article 1 of the state constitution, which was the product of Prop 209. So with respect to what ACA 5 is, your characterization is absolutely correct. With respect to what is before the board, I'd like to make a distinction. What is before the board is, in fact, both questions: supporting ACA 5 and supporting the repeal of Prop 209. And if I may read from the recommendation, the chair of the Board of Regents and the president of the university recommend that the regents endorse Assembly Constitutional Amendment ACA 5 and the repeal of the provisions of Prop 209, 1996, which prohibit the use of race and gender as a factor in UC admissions decisions. Now, with respect to the question of whether or not we're getting before the legislature, in fact, in some ways we are, in some ways we aren't. The legislature doesn't have the ability to weigh in on the decision. They just get to put the question before them. As Regent Lieb asserted, this started with SP1 and SP2, which were regental decisions that predated Prop 209 and that basically implemented as Regents policy the equivalent of Prop 209 before Prop 209 was on the ballot. And in fact, it was a regent, as well as others, who were involved in then taking from SP1 and SP2 and developing Prop 209. So in eliminating the tool, the regents were also ahead of the state and the legislature. In this case, we would go on record now, both with respect to the question of support or opposition to ACA 5 and with respect to the question of repeal of Prop 209.
Could I ask a quick follow-up then? And thank you for the clarification. That's what I thought our endorsement was. And I don't know if this is an appropriate amendment to ask or request, but if that's the case, I'd like to see us have two separate votes, one on ACA 5 and one on support of repealing 209, because in my view, they're two very separate things, and the messaging would be extremely important in terms of the way it's set up. And the vote on the Prop 209 that concerns me is the fact that it may never come to fruition if the Senate doesn't address this issue or it gets defeated in the Senate. And my concern would be is that we've have an endorsement out there that is clearly worded as an and, but obviously the public understood it to be both, at least in the way the public comments came about. And so for me, I'd like to see two separate votes on the issue for people. But I don't know the process for doing that. So,
Regent all you have to do is make a motion to separate the question.
okay, I will move to separate the questions for two separate votes on support of for ACA 5 and a separate vote on a repeal of Prop 209.
Very good. Charlie, am I correct that the motion requires a second?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. Is there a second on the question of separating the question?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the question be separated. I think we should vote very quickly on the separation of the question. So the motion before us is to separate the question. We would then proceed first with an action with respect to support of ACA 5. And then second, after resolution on that question, we would take up the matter of the support of the repeal of Prop 209. Is that consistent with your expectation, Regent?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The first vote is simply whether we're going to separate.
Correct. Right. So the motion before us is the separation of the question. So the secretary will call the roll on the request to separate the question.
Okay, Anguiano.
Aye.
Butler.
No.
Elliott.
No.
Estolano.
Yes.
Kiefer.
Aye.
Kounalakis. Lansing.
I'm comfortable either way. So how do I vote? I mean, so I guess I wrote aye.
Lansing,
I'm comfortable.
aye.
I'm
Lansing,
comfortable both ways. So I don't know what to say.
I'll say Lansing, aye. Lead.
I would vote no on that.
Lead, no. Makarishian.
Aye.
Makarishian, aye. Napolitano.
No.
Napolitano, no. Oakley.
No.
Oakley, no. Park.
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. Riley.
Aye.
Riley, aye. Sherman.
Aye.
Sherman, aye. Simmons.
No.
Simmons, no. Suarez.
Aye.
Aye. Weddle.
No.
Weddle, no. I'm just going to circle back because I'm not sure they're still on, and that would be Kounalakis. Suarez. Motion carries 9-7.
Okay, the motion carries to separate the question. We have quite a few folks seeking recognition. I think the more controversial of the two questions is the question of repeal of Prop 209, which is why the request was made to separate the question. I will ask if folks are comfortable removing their hands for debate on the first question of supporting ACA 5. I'm going to come to you. You don't have to take them down. I'm just going to come to you and see if you want to speak on the first half or if we could proceed to a vote on the first half first. Okay. So Regent Oakley, would you like to speak on ACA 5 or would you like to, or are you willing to?
I'll hold. I will hold.
Thank you. Regent Estolano.
I'll hold as well.
Thank you. Regent Weddle.
Happy to wait.
Regent Muwakil.
Happy to wait.
Faculty Rep Avnani.
Happy to wait.
Regent Stigura.
I'll wait.
Regent Lansing.
So I want to speak on clarification. I'm for both of these, so I want to be clear. But I respect what Regent did in terms of messaging, and either way, I think we need to message this, which is that because it always gets confused, having been been part of this for a while. We are not lowering our academic standards by doing this. And I think someone needs to publicly state that for the record. We're merely expanding. Now it'll be 15 things we consider or whatever the number is, but there's still basic standards to getting into UC. And so I think that it's very important in both of these things that we make that clear. And I guess I wanted to say that for the record so that when people report about it, they understand that we are in no way changing the academic standards, the holistic review that we do. We're adding additional things to consider. That is correct? Correct, President Napolitano, Chair?
That's correct.
And I just want to be sure that message gets out because, people who, I'm for both of these, I publicly state that now, but and very much for them, very enthusiastically for them, but people who are against this use that as something to say. And I think it is extremely important that we make that clear, that the academic, level that you have to get in, the top X% of the class, the grade points, in addition to all the other things are still being considered. We're merely adding another trait. So, thank you. I appreciate that we have publicly stated that for the record.
Regent Kiefer, before we move on.
Yeah, so we've divided the question between the 2 points, whether we support putting this on the ballot, support ACA 5 as a legislative action, and secondly, the underlying question, were it to be on the ballot, what would our position be? It seems that the order of taking this up ought to be taking up the legislative vote first.
As I said, I would.
Oh, okay. So we're not taking up the underlying. And secondly, when we get to the second vote, if someone could explain the impact of the federal restrictions that have been put on the university through legislation as to what it means on that second vote, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I will take those as clarifying questions that reinforce the sequence. So the first item before us is a motion to support the chair of the Board of Regents and the president of the University of California's recommendation that the regents endorse ACA 5. That is the motion before us. It has been moved and seconded. It was moved by Lieb, seconded by Estolano. It does not require an additional motion because we've separated the question. So we are moving forward on the underlying question. The secretary will call the roll.
Okay, Anguiano.
Aye.
Butler.
Aye.
Elliott.
Aye.
Estolano.
Aye.
Kiefer.
Aye.
Kounalakis. Lansing.
Yes. Aye.
Lansing, aye. Lieb.
Aye.
Lieb, aye. Makarishian.
Aye.
Makarishian, aye. Napolitano.
Aye.
Napolitano, aye. Ortiz Oakley.
Aye.
Ortiz Oakley, aye. Park.
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. Riley.
Aye.
Riley, aye. Sherman.
Aye.
Sherman, aye. Simmons.
Aye.
Simmons, aye. Surez.
Aye.
Aye. Weddle.
Aye.
Weddle, aye. Motion approved unanimously.
Wonderful. Thank you, colleagues. That was a unanimous vote for the regents to be on record in endorsing and supporting the passage of ACA 5, which will be considered shortly by the state Senate. The remaining question before us is the second half of the motion by Regent Lieb and Regent Estolano, which is support for the repeal of Prop 209. First, I will go to Regent Ortiz Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try to be to the point here. I do support the motion to put the regents on record to repeal Proposition 209. When I joined the board, I think one of my first comments was that I took my role as a regent very personally because of the personal role one of our colleagues on the Board of Regents took to put Proposition 209 on the ballot, and the role that the Regents as a whole took in Proposition 209. As a Californian, I lived through that moment, and I think there is an opportunity here, particularly at this moment in time, for us to take a positive step forward. We rarely get a moment like this to put a stamp on history. We did once before, we have an opportunity to do it again, and this time to be on the right side of history. So I would urge my colleagues to support this, and not only to support this, but hopefully as it gets on the ballot, to take a personal interest in the repeal of Prop 209, just like we did in past. And the last thing I would say is, for my colleagues who are struggling with this, repealing Prop 209 doesn't change what's happening in the University of California. Repealing Prop 209 doesn't change the fact that we only have 4% African American students in the University of California. Personal action changes. So the drive to better diversify the University of California doesn't end with the repeal of Prop 209. It only gives us additional tools. It'll be up to us, working with the chancellors, working with the academic senate, and with the office of the president to make real change. And then finally, what we're saying here, what I'm saying here, is that every Californian should have an equal opportunity. It is clear from history, it is clear from our own data, that not every Californian has had equal opportunity to enter and succeed at the University of California. Let's take this moment to take one step forward at changing that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Ortiz-Oakley. We will now go to Regent Estolano, followed by Regent Winnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank President Napolitano and Chairman Perez for putting this before us today. This is a consequential vote for many of the reasons that Regent and Regent Oakley noted. We started with a single regent a generation ago, and many of us were students at the time. I was, and saw the harmful effects in real time. The second public speaker today was Casey Keys, who was a classmate of mine at then Bolt Hall, now the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. And she noted that she was speaking on behalf of a group called New Directions in Diversity, of which I was a part. 9 of us, 8 law students and 1 PhD candidate, put together a student-initiated class to try to figure out how would we address diversity in admissions in the University of California in a post-209 world. I'm going to name the authors of this page. Casey Collins Keys, Marvin Pegues, Karen Gustafson, Elizabeth Landsberg, Patrick Sullivan, Holland Hun, Jennifer Madden, Daniel Talalian. We concluded that there was in fact no proxy for race, that in a racist society with structural institutionalized racism at every level of educational and economic attainment, there was no proxy for race. This group of 9 of us have gone on, some of us have stayed in contact, some of us have only been in contact intermittently, but among that group are now judges, university professors, law firm partners, real estate developers, public policy advocates, significant players, civic players in our nation. And we concluded, we didn't think it would take a complete generation to change what the Regents started 25 years ago, but here we are. So I agree with the president. It is with great honor that I state my support for the repeal of Proposition 209. We know what it did to UC Berkeley School of Law, going from the most diverse law school in the nation, top ranked law school in the nation, to one of the least diverse with a single African American in the next class. And he was only admitted the year before. So we would have had 0 African Americans if he had not deferred admission to the Berkeley School of Law. So I want to speak about why this is so important. I have practiced law. I've been a city attorney. I've had the great fortune to sit on this board. I've seen the impact of Proposition 209 throughout my entire career. I've been a creative attorney. I'd advise city agencies on how to try to work around this, how to find ways to create equity and accessibility for government services and benefits and contracting. I've tried very hard to combat the deleterious and pernicious effects of the policy that was divisive, purely political, cynical in many, many respects. It cannot be separated from the political elements of the time, the partisan politics of the time. And yet a generation later, it's taken us a full generation, 25 years, almost 25 years to address this problem. And I applaud Assemblymember Weber for being very consistent in her advocacy through her career in the legislature. And I think it is with great moment that we take this vote as regents. I too, as Regent Oakley, take my responsibility as a regent very, very personally. I know the opportunity, the life-changing aspect of being admitted to the University of California, whether it's as an undergraduate or as a graduate student. And I have made it my passion through my career to try to open up education and economic opportunities for everyone, every Californian. So I think it is appropriate, it is actually our responsibility as regents to address this wrong that one of our predecessors began. And let's be really clear, this is not about politics. This vote is taken because we all recognize that the original sin of this country has to be addressed. And we at the University of California, one of the greatest research institutions in the world, when we take a position in favor of repealing Proposition 209, we don't just bring with it, we're not talking about politics here. We're talking about a generation of research that has documented the harmful impacts, the way this has been an impediment for people of color and low-income people to access the University of California and educational resources. So we don't just do this because it's kind of a cool thing to do. We do this because we've studied it. We know what it's done. We know the impediments it's created. We know how difficult it's been to live up to our own ideals with this in place. And this is our opportunity to right a historic wrong. So I urge my colleagues to unanimously approve the motion to put the University of California on record as supporting the repeal of Proposition 209. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Regent Estolano. Regent Weddle.
First, thank you to the chair for coordinating this historic vote. I'm really supportive of repealing 209. I'd like to urge the board to view the endorsement of ACA 5 and the repeal of 209 as the first of many steps that are needed to better promote equity within the UC. Considerable work lies ahead, including cultivating campus climate that truly supports students of color, paying particular attention to sense of belonging for Black and Indigenous students. These efforts must include re-envisioning the university's relationship with policing and evaluating how our budgetary decisions could better support efforts to dismantle systemic racism. I'll close by saying I'm really proud of this board for taking on the endorsement of ACA 5 and the repeal of Prop 209. And I look forward to seeing continued actions promoting equity in the upcoming year.
Thank you, Regent Weddle. Regent Wakil.
Thank you, Chair. First, I want to start off by saying what a wonderful opportunity it is to speak on this issue at this time, and especially at this time. When addressing this issue, I present the question, who do we want to be? What is our mission? And who do we serve? Since the passage of 209, the Black community suffered a huge blow, and the consequences of that decision has rippled throughout our community. The UC and California have also endured great harm due to the systematic barriers put in place to resist Black access and integration at all levels of the UC. I will say that there have been some initiatives and programs that have improved conditions for Black students and faculty, and many of these have been well-intentioned and creative. But while Prop 209 is in place, this is nothing more than harm mitigation. To take a colorblind approach to admissions is to take an ahistorical approach. Not only does the lack of diversity harm the intellectual mission of the UC, it is also immoral. Not only does a lack of diversity, so we need to do better. We can do better. Supporting ACA 5 and repealing Prop 209 is a step in the right direction, but as Regent Weddle has just stated, it is but the first step in the right direction. So I amplify the voices of the students of California, the University of California Student Association, the University of California Graduate and Professionals Council in support of the Regent's endorsement of ACA 5 and the repeal of Prop 209. I'd like to also specifically thank the chair and the president for their leadership on this issue and bringing this item before us today. I urge unanimous consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Regent Muwakil. Faculty Rep Bhavnani.
Thank you, Chair Perez. Firstly, I'd like to thank President Napolitano and yourself, Chair Perez, for bringing this forward. On June 9th, the Academic Senate, the Academic Council of the Academic Senate of the University voiced its unanimous support for ACA 5. We point out that Proposition 209 has had a devastating effect on the University of California's ability to live up to our mandate. We recognize the deep commitment to diversity and equality for the University of California that the Office of the President, the Chancellors, and the Regents have. To that end, we want to formally state that we would like to express our deep support for this motion, even as we are not voting members. The Senate has always supported the UC. We support the students, staff, and faculty, and to that end, we therefore support the state as a whole. The third largest employer of the state, the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, has no business not having a diverse enough workforce and student body. Regents' policies SP1, SP2 were heinous, and it is good that they're not there anymore. I believe I'm right on that. As Regent Estelano said, there is no proxy for race or ethnicity. The state of California has Latinx populations, African American / Black populations, indigenous populations, and many other people of color, including East Asian populations. Repealing 209 and putting in place ACA 5 will allow for the university to improve its excellence. Excellence, affordability, and accessibility are the three pillars of the university. And excellence means that the university has a diverse population amongst all its constituencies. And it is that diversity that is going to be permitted more openly and in a more powerful way if ACA 5 is passed by the voters. As you know, the Senate had a report on standardized testing, and that report focused on how students of color, and if students of color were disadvantaged as a result of using standardized tests. That report suggested that it wasn't quite such a simple answer as many believe. The faculty have always supported diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. These are statements that the faculty are asked to write when they come up for merit and promotion. And it is a measure of your commitment to the whole university, to the excellence of the university, that we do this. So to that end, as many will understand from the letter I read out, the Senate wholeheartedly and unanimously supports ACA 5 and hopes to put an end to the proposition that has permitted racism to expand at times. It is ACA 5 that will stop this sort of movement and will indeed allow the university to move forward with excellence. Thank you, Chair Perez.
Thank you. I'd like to to speak next if there's no objection. Regent Kiefer, you have a point of personal privilege? You're muted.
Mr. Chairman. I did want to speak at some point, but I wanted to get back to my question in connection with this.
Your question is not a privileged question. If you have a privileged question, I'll take it now. If not, I will take your question when you speak.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
Question of privilege.
No.
Thank you. I struggled with when I would speak in this debate, and I feel compelled to speak here in the middle. I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes of Bishop Desmond Tutu, who said, "If you are neutral in a situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." This is properly before us because much of this started with this body. It started with a passage of SP1 and SP2. It started with an effort to try to create divisiveness with respect to the promise of what a great university has to offer. And it went on to express itself in the passage of Prop 209. This has been a question that the legislature has been dealing with for 7 years. First with SCA 5 by then Senator Ed Hernandez, and now with ACA 5 by Assemblywoman Dr. Shirley Weber. Dr. Weber is a UCLA PhD in history who went on to be one of the founding faculty in the Department of Afrikaner Studies at San Diego State University. It was mentioned in her own speech closing on the debate of ACA 5 that her decision to move forward now with the attempt of repealing Prop 209 was significantly impacted by a visit she had, several visits she had to our campuses, but in particular a visit that she had to Berkeley. And one of the commenters today in public comment made reference to that same visit. It was a hearing by the Assembly Select Committee on Campus Climate. I founded that committee. I created the Assembly Committee on Campus Climate significantly because of incidences at San Jose State University, where a young Black student was bullied, was locked out of his dorm room, was made to feel less, had his personal effects stolen. And in fact, it got to the point that there was a U-shaped bike lock put around his neck as he was locked in the closet of his own dorm room. And the perpetrators were his roommates. And the university failed to act time and time again. And it was only after his parents visited the campus and saw a Confederate flag on his dorm room window that people began to pay attention. And it took the district attorney, not the campus, to proceed. The action was to remove him from the environment and not to remove the perpetrators. Let us be clear that racism exists within our campus communities. It was also informed by the Compton Cookout at UC San Diego, where some of the most horrific language was used with respect to our African-American students, which reinforced a climate on that campus that made it virtually impossible to attract some of the best and brightest African-American students from throughout the state who had been admitted to the campus, but found it to be an unwelcoming situation. That was under a previous chancellor, and poor Pradeep Khosla, when he came to my office the first day as the new chancellor, had to hear an earful from me, holding him accountable for things that he had no role in. And so the Committee on Campus Climate has looked at a lot of questions. But let us be clear, racism is real. The discussion in the recent weeks has focused on the fact that racism is deadly. It is pernicious, but it can also be subtle. It can masquerade as genteel and as courteous. That is the most dangerous part of it. when it takes on such subtle forces and such subtle appearances that well-intentioned people fail to recognize it. When you look at studies of efforts of graduate students to get placed with faculty in research assignments, when you look at the way in which essays and applications are viewed differently based on the perception of the race or gender of the person filling out the application, that gives you insight into some of the challenges that we've had in diversifying our graduate and professional schools. When you look at the way it expresses itself in some reviews of faculty members going through the tenure process, these are the equally dangerous, subtle examples of racism in its most structural form. To pretend that they don't exist is to deny the reality of those who live with those challenges day in and day out. To say that a colorblind model is the appropriate model for our society or for our university isn't to say that we're colorblind, but that we're blind to the impacts of structural racism and other structural challenges that undermine the integrity of our pursuit. It is in fact to deny the humanity of those of us who have struggled with these challenges day in and day out. And it is for that reason that if we are going to be serious about creating a university that truly serves the public interest, we cannot be silent, we cannot be neutral. We must express ourselves in what we think the best future for our university and our state. And it is for that reason that the President and I both ask for your aye vote on this question. With that, I will go to Regent Stigura.
Thank you, Chair Perez. Thank you for your comments. And also, I want to add my thanks to the President and the Chair for bringing this forward. Regent Oakley mentioned that many tools have been developed to post Prop 209 to try to admit a better balance of students in our state. And one such tool is holistic review for admissions. I have read applications for admission to the university under holistic review, and I have felt that it is a poor way to achieve the balance in our student body that reflects what California is. I will note that many people of color are also potential first-generation college students. I think that there's no better way to achieve what Fac Rep Nani has mentioned and others have mentioned about serving the mission of this institution, which is as a public university to serve better all demographics, all populations of the state of California. Regent Oakley mentioned that even under some of those tools, only, for example, 4% of the student body is African American. As Regent Estolano said, this is not about politics. This is about doing the right thing. And I wish that this were my voting year. It's not my voting year, but I ask all of the board to please unanimously support the repeal of 209.
Thank you, Regent Stigura. Regent Lansing, then Regent Simmons. Regent Lansing, you are recognized.
Actually, I forgot to take my hand down, but I'm just happy to thank you, Chair Perez and President Napolitano. Everything that Chair Perez said, I thought was so extraordinarily eloquent, and I couldn't say anything better than the way you said it. So I thank you for giving us the opportunity to vote on this, and I enthusiastically support it.
Regent Simmons, followed by Regent Park.
Thank you so much, Chair Perez, and thank you for bringing this before us. Words can't even express how important a unanimous vote is for us today. We have to continue to blow up every institutionalized construct of racism, oppression, misogyny, homophobia, if we truly are going to be the public university that we want to be proud of. We can't continue to dance around it. This is a time in which everyone is recognizing all of the inequities that got us to this boiling point, and how institutionalized racism, institutionalized oppression of all of these different communities, that is what is at the core of this. And now we have a seat at the table to be able to make a difference, to change it, not dance around it, not put a Band-Aid on it. And kudos to those that have been working hard to work around it, to still try to push through diversity. But now we're at that time where that's not enough. It's never going to be enough. We have 450 years to make up for one particular community and a lot more for others. So a unanimous vote by this board is critical in this time to stand up and to say that this is the type of public university we want to be. Because if we aren't going to do it here, the ones that actually instituted it, then we really need to take a good look in the mirror to understand what we stand for and who we are and the type of students that we want to attract. And then again, to Faculty Rep Bhavnani's point about being the biggest employer, this talks about employees. This affects our vendors and our suppliers. We affect generational wealth in ways that other organizations do not. From education to jobs to businesses to healthcare to research, all of these things. And that's why we were created, right? To change trajectories, to fix these inequities. I don't want to be the best Black regent. I don't want to be the best female regent. I just want to be the best regent. But unfortunately, there are some inequities that I have to overcome in order to be able to do that. And 209 got me into UCLA, I have no doubt. But 209 did not allow me to graduate from UCLA. I graduated from UCLA on the backs and on the shoulders of so many that came before me. So let us be clear, and I cannot urge this enough. It is time. And I wholeheartedly support and hope for a unanimous vote in support of repealing 209. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Simmons. Regent Park, Regent and then Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, and then I'll continue on from there.
Thank you, Chair Perez. So as an Asian American woman, I just wanted to say I wholeheartedly endorse the chair and president's recommendation to not only put this repeal before the voters, but to actually repeal Proposition 209. I grew up in the Los Angeles area in the 70s and 80s. I grew up as a racial and ethnic minority, and I believe that we have made progress as a society, but there is absolutely no doubt that we still have a dramatically unequal society. And that we see the egregious examples of individual and systemic racism, unfortunately, every day. We need to stop pretending that everyone has access to equal opportunity, because they don't. And as the chair said, pretending that race and gender and ethnicity don't matter is a fantasy. It matters both in the negative in terms of the rampant discrimination that we see. It results in countless lives lost, whether through COVID or police brutality, but it also really matters in the positive in terms of race and gender and ethnicity contributing to the vibrancy of our society and our democracy. So unless we're for the permanent stratification of our society, and unless we want to freeze the lack of opportunity and income inequality in California, we need to change so much of what we do. And repealing Prop 209 won't fix all that we need to fix, but it is one thing we can do in the current moment and is so important for the University of California to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, and then Faculty Rep Govain.
Thank you, Chair Perez. I wholeheartedly support Prop 209. The repeal of Prop 209, and echo the comments previously. And And I think I'm aligned with Regent Park in a large way, because I think our community specifically has been targeted on this particular issue as being sort of on the fence on it. I have to be honest, there was a reason why I wanted to split the vote, because I didn't want to get ahead of the Senate on this. I also, one of the other reasons for it is because I'm concerned that if the Senate were not to pass this by 2/3 to get to a vote, that our vote becomes largely symbolic and we don't get an opportunity to be able to fully endorse it. So, but I'm convinced that a strong, unanimous support of this particular endorsement of the repeal of 209 is important. So for that, I would support it. But I would like this body to promise me that it will, in the event that it becomes before the voters after, if and when the Senate approves, that you again have this conversation once again in this body. Similar enthusiasm, similar personal stories and the like, because I think that's when it's really, to me, the pivotal time period where the vote will actually matter, because it will be an endorsement at that time. So that's a hope that I have for this body. And that will also give the current designates who are non-voting right now, but who have expressed their strong support, an opportunity to be able to reinforce their votes as well. So with that, I'm prepared to support the endorsement of 209. Although I still believe that we are getting a bit ahead of the Senate, which it does concern me. But I trust that the folks on this call who are more knowledgeable about how the legislature works and the importance of all of this, so I'll be deferring to them in changing my abstention to a support of this repeal of 209.
Thank you, Regent Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, followed by Faculty Rep. Gouvain, and then Regents Anguiano and Butler are the last hands I see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also want to add my voice in recognition of the chair and the president for bringing this issue forward to a vote. I think that the outpouring of support that we've seen by members of the University of California's broader community, faculty, students, I think that that's a reflection of the fact that we as a community understand how damaging Proposition 209 has been. As a young activist 22 years ago, I campaigned against it. And I think everyone who was out on that campaign at the time knew that it was going to be very damaging for our equity goals. And truly, those concerns have come true. In fact, as I was looking back to what was going on at the time of its passage, to your point, Mr. Chair, the regents had a role at that time. The regents were aware of the fact that system-wide affirmative action policies that were in place prior to 1998 were working, that it had increased the enrollment system-wide of Latino, Black, and Native American students by about 12%. It makes it even more insidious that one member of the regents at the time stood up and spearheaded the effort to advance Proposition 209. That member used his status as a member of the UC Board of Regents to advocate for the elimination of affirmative action policies that he had to have known were working to advance inclusion in the UC system. It makes it ever more important that this body vote unanimously in favor of the repeal of Proposition 209 and support of ACA 5. I'd also just like to note that once the legislature takes this action, if ACA 5 goes on the ballot, there will be a campaign. And I urge everyone, every member of this board and everyone in our community to do everything you can in order to help raise awareness and understanding among the voters and the people of California in order to be able to vote to repeal Proposition 209. Because the campaign, this is just the first step. The campaign will be the second step. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. So we now have Faculty Rep. Govain, Regents Anguiano and Butler, followed by Regents Kiefer and Riley.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for their comments. I find them very inspiring, including those that were offered in the public comment session earlier. I also want to thank you, Chair Perez, for bringing this issue before the board. I want to add my voice to the discussion now. On behalf of the UC faculty, I join with Chair Bhavnani to urge the regents to vote unanimously to endorse repeal of Proposition 209. Thank you.
Thank you, Faculty Representative Bhavnani. God, you put Kumkum's name in my head right there. Thank you, Representative Govain. Regent Anguiano, then Regent Butler.
Thank you, Chair Perez. First of all, I just want to thank you and President Napolitano for bringing us together to put the regents back on the right side of history. In 1998, when Prop 209 ban kicked in, that was 1 year after I graduated high school, which was in 1997. And it really weighs heavily on me and my heart to think about the generation of students after me that by 1 year missed the opportunities I was able to access. And I can't express myself better than you, Chair Perez, on the role of racism in our society and the importance of our support for the repeal of 209. So I will just +1 your statement. And I ask that the regents vote unanimously in support. What I will add is that this is just step one of dismantling all the other ways that systemic and institutionalized racism creates impediments and holds our communities of color back from accessing the university. And this is at the faculty, staff, and leadership level as well. Importantly, I think we as regents need to continue to work incredibly hard to ensure that the UC education is dramatically more accessible and affordable to Californians for truly to deliver on the promise of inclusivity and make a UC education possible for all our students that deserve it. So with that, I wholly support the motion.
Thank you, Regent Anguiano. Regent Butler.
Thank you, Chair. And I am deeply grateful for all of the public comment that we heard this morning, and grateful, honestly, for all of the comment that we've heard from our colleagues across the board. I would like to start my comments by acknowledging that President Napolitano and Chair Perez, along with our chancellors, could have made a different choice, could have taken an interim step, could have issued a statement. And I think it's worth acknowledging their leadership to understand that this is a conversation that the regents and the public, through their public comment, should have their voices heard on. And so I join the chorus of appreciation for the leadership of our chair and our president. I wanted to make my comments pretty brief, as there's been so much already stated. 2 points that I would like to make. One is to go back to Regent Muakil's questioning and interrogatory at this moment as to who we are. I think Jamal was really speaking to who we are as a system, who we are as a gift to the public. And I'd like to sort of pose a question. As I started to think about this, my question was one of a personal nature. Who are we as a board of regents? And if we look at the decision that we made, the courage that we had to reject and abandon the industrial educational complex by moving away from the ACT and the SAT, do we not have the courage? do we not have the courage to reject the racism so bound in this institution, so intertwined in the history of this board, of this very body? Do we not have that courage? And so I am really, my heart is warmed to hear this morning that this is a board that is indeed one of courage, that is prepared to face this moment that our system can again be a leader of our state and a leader in our nation by how we unabashedly can declare that Black lives matter and that California is going to be a megaphone in this conversation. The second point I would like to offer, Chair Perez, really is a question to you and your direction and leadership. But it is just another sort of question of what does it mean for this board to have and display courage? How do we make manifest our intent to really be a leader in this space? It occurred to me that in the March midterm, our public engagement committee had set a priority for the ballot measure around the school bond, and how important we said it was to our campuses that bond pass. But there was very little conversation and little to no plan that was articulated as to what is the role of this body going to be in passing that ballot measure and making sure that our campuses got the resources that they needed to build so much incredibly important infrastructure for our students. And so I would ask Chair Perez that we not repeat that example, but that if we are going to take a position on the repeal of Proposition 209, and where I would take make a little disagreement with Regent in that it is our job to lead the Senate, not just to wait on the Senate to make a decision. And by acting, we can help to make sure that the Senate understands that the very body that made this decision and that helped to create this wrong is prepared to do whatever it takes to correct it. And so I would like to ask Chair Perez if there is a way for the Public Engagement Committee and any other special committee that you might want to set up to really figure out how are we going to utilize the assets that we have as a Board of Regents and really shoulder our responsibility in speaking to the public about what this measure is and frankly what it is not, about what Proposition 209 did and what it did not. And I think that is an incredibly important part of the sort of follow through and demonstration of our commitment in this moment. And so with that, Chair Perez, I would like to raise my voice in support of the motion, appreciating those who have made it, those who have spoken, and ready to get to work.
Thank you, Regent Butler, and we will follow up with respect to your questions of action. I will work with the General Counsel and the Chair of the Public Engagement Committee to see that which is appropriate, and so that we act within the confines of that which we can do institutionally and collectively. And then I'm sure several of us will have personal conversations about that which we can do individually. Regent Kiefer, followed by Regent Riley, Representative Climo, Regent Lieb, and then Regent Lansing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the motion. I want to speak to those out there who have not had the experience that the board has had, the chancellors have had, and the president has had to see the impacts of 209. And why probably so many out there will struggle, as I have struggled over the last few years, to reconcile what we think is a colorblind constitution and frankly a colorblind-like statement of 209 and its impact and how at a given time it has to be looked at in a different way. Regent Estolano said that noted that Prop 209 was not adopted without a context. The context was very clear and led by one of our former regents. I agree with Regent Oakley that it's up to this board to correct that. But the struggle that I think people will have out there is understanding how the wording of Proposition 209, which on its face looks like it's very much a part of the Constitution, it can have such a detrimental effect and can be overcome essentially by the needs of society at a different time, and that is this time. So after most lawyers who study constitutional law and spend time with free speech and discrimination issues, the first reaction is, what's wrong with Proposition 209? It seems to restate what the law is. And yet we've got a bigger problem in society that we've got to address. And so in some ways you leapfrog mentally, and that's what I have done, to a bigger issue and a more serious issue that has to be addressed. I still warn that that in another state, in another place, this can be used against us. And we need to be vigilant about that. So as I say, I'm speaking to those who are outside the board who have not seen how this has inhibited. And the last 3 weeks have probably educated many of us to a deeper level than we've ever been educated before. The comments of Regents Perez, Estolano, and Oakley in particular, I think are very moving and ought to be understood as to a real basis of why we will unanimously want to support this motion, and I will.
Thank you, Regent Kiefer, and thank you for helping us tease out some of the questions of how we communicate that which inform this and those implications as well. So thank you for that. Regent Riley, and then Representative Klimmel.
Thank you, Chair. I too would like to thank you and President Napolitano for bringing this item before us this morning. I am so honored to be able to sit on this board and to have the opportunity to vote for the repeal, the endorsement of the repeal of Proposition 209. You know, this is a time when many of us are asking ourselves, what can I do to make a difference? And this feels like a very significant and a meaningful step for us to take. And I am really proud to stand with all of my fellow colleagues here on the Board of Regents, with the Academic Senate, and with our entire University of California community in voting yes on this item and moving forward with the university to really meet our mandate and our promise of offering a world-class education to everyone, regardless of race, background, income. And just want to thank you again for having us here together at this very important moment.
Thank you so much, Regent Riley. Now we will move on to Representative Klimmel, followed by Regents Lieb and Lansing.
Thank you, Chair Perez. I speak on behalf of myself and Staff Advisor Designate Ann Jeffrey. I don't think either one of us could improve on the thoughtful and moving comments that regents have made, so I won't try to do that, but I will say that our role on this board, even though we don't have a vote, it's to amplify the voice of staff. So I do want to take this opportunity on behalf of the staff of the University of California to join with you loudly and clearly in calling for a unanimous vote. I know staff would be proud to take that vote and raise their hand if they could. So thank you for this time.
Thank you. Regent Lansing for the final word.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Regent Lieb, then Regent Lansing for the final word. Sorry about that, Regent Lieb.
No problem, Chair Perez. I just wanted to respond to Regent Butler as chair of the Public Engagement Committee. I want to assure that we're going to take a very, very strong role in this. I appreciate her comments. I think she's correct in the Prop 13. We didn't do as much as we could legally do. I think as Chair Perez said, we need to check with our general counsel's office to make sure that we are able, what we're able to do. But I think we need to engage very, very heavily in this. And I will certainly be making this a priority for our committee.
Thank you. Now, Regent Lansing.
Yes, I was going to respond to Regent Butler, and I'm going to continue to, because I'm just going to hopefully assume that this passes in the Senate, and I feel that we're heading to a unanimous vote here, which thrills me. But I want to say this is just the beginning. We really now have to mobilize, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to be limited to what we can do as regions. But I want to emphasize what you said, Chair Perez, when you said doing nothing is being part of the problem. And Desmond Tutu said it much better, and you said it much better than the way I'm saying it. But as individuals, we can do a lot. And I also want to say that in other times when we've tried to get initiatives passed, Prop 30, I believe, is the most recent, we mobilized the students, and we did it as individuals. And so I just want to encourage all of us to know that this is an incredibly important vote. And I'm so grateful to you, Chair Perez, for bringing it forward. I'm so grateful to President Napolitano for your leadership and for your courage. But this is really just the beginning. We must work to get this passed. So with that, I'd like to call for the vote. Am I allowed to do that?
Thank you. Seeing no further regents seeking recognition, the vote is before us. The secretary will call the roll on the second half of the question, which is the support of the repeal of Proposition 209.
Okay, Regents Anguiano.
Aye.
Anguiano, aye. Butler.
Aye.
Butler, aye. Elliott.
Aye.
Elliott, aye. Estelano.
Aye.
Estelano, aye. Kiefer.
Aye.
Kiefer, aye. Kounalakis.
Aye.
Kounalakis, aye. Lansing.
Aye.
Lansing, aye. Lieb.
Aye.
Lieb, aye. Makarishian.
Aye.
Makarishian, aye. Napolitano.
Aye.
Napolitano, aye. Ortiz Oakley.
Absolutely.
Ortiz Oakley, aye. Park.
Aye.
Park, aye. Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. Riley.
Aye.
Riley, aye. Sherman.
Aye.
Sherman, aye. Simmons.
Aye.
Simmons, aye. Suarez.
Wholeheartedly aye.
Suarez, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Weddle.
Aye.
Weddle, aye. Motion is approved unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to thank you all for making yourselves available so quickly. The reason we did this again in a special meeting was because the ACA was moving through the houses more quickly than anticipated, which meant that we couldn't wait to schedule this for our July meeting, as would have otherwise been the case. I think this is an important day and an important message for the university that really speaks to what we view our collective role in making this a truly publicly serving university. So thank you all. With that, we adjourned.